I'm Debbie Bell Hosking here in the FinextraTV virtual studio, and I'm talking to Pat Patel of Elevandi. Elevandi is one of the organizers of the upcoming Singapore FinTech Festival, which is happening in the beginning of November. So, Pat, first of all, hello.
Hi Debbie, how are you?
Very well, and a big welcome to our virtual studio. I mentioned the Singapore FinTech Festival, or SFF. It's a 5 day event, beginning of November. As one of the organizers, what can we expect at the SFF?
Sure. It's 5 days of a marathon ultimately. It's the seventh year for the festival, so we've been running for quite some time now, and the scale has grown year on year. This year we're expecting 60,000 crazy fintech folks all descending upon Singapore. It's going to be fun, it's going to be furious, and there's going to be lots of value as well. And so it starts ultimately on the 31st of October, which is the Monday, and then it will finish at the end of Friday, so that's the 4th of November. We have so many activities because you've got to kind of think that this event is very different than your usual fintech events, and there are so many around the world. Most of them are quite commercial in nature, whereas a lot of our focus is around bringing the regulators and policymakers into the dialogue with the industry. So whether that's corporate leaders, whether that's investors, whether that's fintech founders. And so that's why there's quite a different nuance to this event, because ultimately, as everyone knows, that if you want to advance the future of financial services or fintech, you kind of need the regulators in the conversation. And so a lot of the activities that we do all brings that together. And so we have the innovation lab crawls on the first 2 days. And so this is quite a unique activity where we have about, I think it's 26 or so different innovation labs, from kind of the big banks to payments companies to the tech giants. Even startups and accelerators will be opening their doors and sharing some of the latest projects and experiments that they're working on. So we kind of see this as more of a distributed event across the whole of Singapore. Wherever these labs are located, they'll be opening their doors for the community and ultimately to engage and try and form partnerships and opportunities for the community to work together. And then on the Tuesday, we also have a new initiative called the Capital Meets Policy Dialogue. And so this is ultimately our investor summit Mark II. And so what we've decided to do is bring investors together with policymakers and regulators. And you may be asking yourself the question, those two groups don't tend to meet on a regular basis. And so our thesis on this is that investors need to know these policy roadmaps for the next 1 to 3 years, because ultimately it will inform where they deploy this capital. And so from a regulators and policymakers perspective, they're keen to attract as many of the investors to come to their particular markets. And it can also help inform how they shape some of their policy making choices. So whether it's around digital assets, whether it's around cross-border payments, whether it's around kind of digital banking and banking licenses. So it's a unique kind of gathering of some of the world's leading investors. So VCs, corporate venture capitalists, as well as family offices and sovereign wealth funds, coming together with kind of senior leaders from the central banks and wider governments. And so that's going to be a really interesting activity, and it's our first time we're doing it. So fingers crossed, and I'm sure it will go well. And then as we kind of come on to the 3 days of the festival itself, the main conference part, which is more of a centralized event. It's the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, so ultimately the 2nd to the 4th of November. And we've got lots of things going on. We have this global plenary stage, which you have all of the heads of state and the policymakers and kind of corporate leaders, as well as kind of fintech founders, all coming onto that stage and speaking and sharing, ideally their insights and what they're expecting for 2023, all the way through to some smaller stages. So this year we're trialing something called Founders Peak. And so I actually think this is a world first, because I'm not seeing it anywhere else. And so what we've done here is we've identified 50 of the leading founders from around the world, and we've simply asked them to come in and give a 10-minute talk, but it can't be around their product or their company. Ultimately, it's around the lived experience of a founder. And, as you know, founders go through so many scars and highs and lows. And ultimately, it's going to be a heartfelt 10 minutes about a particular journey, whether positive or negative, but something they want to share with the audience. And so we're really stoked about that. It's kind of like FinTech meets a TED Talk ultimately. And so that's something we're really excited about. We also have something we're trialing as well called the Elevandi Insights Forum. And this is something we experimented with in Zurich with the Swiss government earlier this year. And it went really well. The premise of this is, yet again, bringing policymakers and regulators together with the industry in a roundtable format, kind of Chatham House rules on point topics. And so we have 25 of these that will be running throughout the 3 days in the afternoons. And there'll be smaller groups of people, 2 hours in length on a particular topic. And the premise of this is to advance particular topic areas within fintech. And so we're working with the MAS on this, so they'll be hosting a few roundtables. We have the Swiss government hosting a couple. We have the IFC, so the World Bank's IFC running some. And then we have the IMF as well, so the International Monetary Fund. They're going to be running a roundtable as well. And then there's the Bank of International Settlements, so the BIS will be running these as well. So it's a great opportunity away from stages and the media and the public kind of stages to come together in smaller groups to really advance the thinking, whether it's in tokenization, digital assets, whether it's in cross-border payments, artificial intelligence, or even kind of topics such as kind of talent development, which, as you know, is a big challenge around the world and certainly is a challenge in Singapore as well. So that's kind of something that we're really excited about because these are going to be really intellectually stimulating. And, the hope and the ambition here is to truly advance certain areas within fintech financial services. We also have a new area. Oh, please go.
On that
Yeah,
point, there's a lot of creative thinking, and you're packing in the agenda, and I see why you used those words, fun, fast, and value. And you also mentioned the number of attendees. So this really does sound like an event just brimming with creative thinking and collaboration from what you're saying, as well as interesting seminars. So how does this all tie into the theme of building resilient business models amid volatility and change?
sure. No, it's a good question, and it's ultimately the heart and soul of it. So each year the festival has a theme that it gets behind, and the way we kind of devise this theme is conversations within governments, conversations within the industry, and we kind of come down to one topic or kind of thematic area that serves as a catalyst for change. So something that the industry needs to hear. And so 2016 was all around financial inclusion. Later on, we've covered sustainability. I think that was in 2019. 2020 was all around people and talent because 2020 was probably one of the darkest years in recent history. Last year was all around Web3. And so I think we were the first major kind of event to cover Web3 and how that impacts financial services. And this year, when we've looked at some of the trends and activity going on in the market, clearly public and private markets have been challenged. There's been a market correction. Valuations have dropped, and I think there's a crazy stat that 850 billion has been wiped off the top 10 fintechs valuations in the world. And this is something that is changing fintech. It's changing ultimately the mindset, and it's changing the way entrepreneurs are beginning to think about their business models because the streets aren't paved with gold and exit strategies kind of need to change as well. And so what we're focusing on this year is something we feel the industry needs to hear. And so we will be deconstructing the very essence of what a resilient business model is in today's volatile world. And so we kind of break that down into three areas. So one is viability. And ultimately, when you think of viability, it's thinking about that first principles. And I think that's kind of it's been a topic that hasn't really been prevalent in recent years. A lot of people in fintech still hold this term unicorn in very high regard, but ultimately all that says is you've reached a valuation of 1 billion, and that doesn't necessarily say anything about the financials or your profitability as an organization. And so we feel that that first principles needs to come back, and that's why that first kind of pillar of this is viability. The second is around responsibility. So it's all well and good making money from your business model, but what are you doing to contribute back? You know, how are you contributing responsibly, and how are you embedding some of the ESG goals into the DNA of your organization? And then the last element is all around inclusivity. And so we feel quite passionately that inclusivity has to be a part of a resilient business model. And that is, you know, how does your model cater to the unbanked and underbanked? But not just those communities, there is another growing community which sadly seems to be expanding exponentially, and that is those that have been pushed to the margins or the fringes of society. And you know, these people may have financial products, but their debt levels are so high that it's a moot point. And so I think it's there is a requirement for the industry to come together and think, how do we bring these people off the fringes back into society, back into the financial services world, and able to use products and services like everyone else. So that's kind of the inclusive theme, and just one more nuance to that is on the inclusivity is a movement away from the Web 2 models, which are kind of large, gated, monolithic platforms, to something that's more open and interoperable, and that's more akin to the Web 3 world. And so that's something we feel is this kind of it's a secular trend that's occurring, and we feel that's an important ingredient in resilient business models, but more on the operational side.
And that's interesting, Pat, because you're talking about these different trends within these resilient business models. Are there any, we touched a bit on the agenda in the opening of our interview. Are there any speakers at SFF that you're particularly excited about hearing?
How long have you got?
Well, that's probably answers it, but perhaps you could name one or two.
Yeah. Sure, sure. I'll try and keep it short and sweet, but we have a number of leading founders. So we have Christo from Wires will be coming across, and he'll be sitting alongside Julian from WeFox. So WeFox is one of the largest insurtechs in the world, and is expanding from Europe into multiple markets now across Asia. And then we have someone who is largely a legend in the India marketplace, a guy called Kunal Shah, that is a serial founder, has done very well. And so bringing these three individuals together, I think is going to be a fantastic one, because they are ultimately resilience personified, and they'll be able to talk about what they've been doing, and how they see the current state of their businesses, but also in the context of the marketplace. We have Anthony Tan, so he is the founder and CEO of Grab. So Grab is ultimately kind of like the Uber stroke super app across this part of the world. And he'll be sitting alongside a educational reformist, a guy called Sonam Wanchuk, who lives in the foothills of the Himalayas. And the two of them will be coming together to talk about entrepreneurship and what that means, and more around a moral compass. And so a slight change in thinking on, you know, what the success metrics of entrepreneurship should be. We have Melinda Gates coming along as well, and so she'll be speaking at the event, and she'll be talking quite a bit around kind of diversity and inclusion. We have the digital assets leaders, so people like Brian Armstrong, who is the co-founder or the founder of Coinbase. We have Jeremy, the founder of Circle. We also have an interesting character called Stuart Haber. So Stuart Haber, not many people know who he is, but ultimately he was one of the people that inspired Satoshi's white paper on Bitcoin. So if you think back, that seminal paper that influenced ultimately a large industry, the person that influenced him is a guy called Stuart Haber. We also have CZ from Binance, who's obviously, you know, a very well-known individual. And then we have Vitalik. So obviously one of the big news stories of this year was the merge, and how Ethereum has ultimately improved its product and its technology. And so Vitalik will be coming in to talk about that. We have government leaders from kind of deputy prime ministers coming along, as well as the FCA's Nikhil. So the CEO of the FCA will be there, as well as kind of governors from different parts of the world, all coming together to talk about some of the policy making choices. And if that's not enough, we have a Nobel laureate coming along as well to talk about the S part of ESG. So I could go on. I think there's one more to add, is probably Venkat, who is the CEO of Barclays. So this is just a snippet of the speakers we have, truly global from across APAC, but also the rest of the world as well. So very, very excited to
Wow.
see what they can share on stage.
And Pat, you say that's a snippet, but it does sound absolutely exciting and thrilling to be there, because it sounds like the conversation is going to be vast, interesting, and also have a sense of fluidity about it, just hearing you talk, which I always think is exciting. And when we spoke offline, you did mention you might have a little exclusive bonus announcement.
So I was hoping I would be able to share this with you, but unfortunately, we're still going through final kind of paperwork on it. But ultimately, and this is where the Singapore FinTech Festival is, sets itself apart than any other fintech event in the world, in that we have two prime ministers that will be coming on stage to make an announcement and also do something actually very unique. It will be quite groundbreaking. And just to think, two prime ministers coming together on stage to announce something that actually moves the market forward. I can't remember the last time, if at all, that's ever happened. So this is something. So I would encourage your viewers and audience to stay tuned, and hopefully we're going to break this news at the end of this week. If not, it will be early next week. So yeah, excited for that one, and I just wish I could share it with your audience.
Well, that is exciting in itself, because we can all keep an eye on the Singapore FinTech Festival, because it seems not only is it a packed agenda, there's lots of exciting things happening on stage and around the main stages, but also it's still evolving into more and more. So we can watch your agenda, keep across it. And Pat, thank you so much for joining us in the virtual studio.
Awesome. Thanks for your time too.